started this vlog a couple of weeks ago, I had no idea it would develop into such a blockbuster. Blockbuster not only figuratively, but literally. If you're at all interested in the BC Museum, have a look at this amazing story. Worthy of a movie or at least a documentary, as you will see. You're viewing Travels with Lobo, now with the completion of my 35-part series, Thailand from the North, from my hometown of Victoria, British Columbia. Remember, a vlog is published every Friday. Here are the chapters of this video. In case you're in a hurry, you can click on the various topics that interest you, but I really suggest you view this gripping story. Ironically, the best view that you could get of the inner harbor area of Victoria, British Columbia would be from the third floor of the Royal BC Museum. It also provides the best view of the BC Legislature. Remember, Victoria is the capital of British Columbia, and this is the seat of our government. This magnificent neo-Gothic building was the work of the architect Francis Rattenbury and was completed in 1898, panning north the inner harbor, the magnificent inner harbor, which provides year-round access to the Pacific Ocean. You can find sailboats here year-round. The tower is the bell tower of the museum. And that brings me to the second jewel of the inner harbor, the Fairmont Empress Hotel, the legendary Fairmont Empress. And just to the left of the Fairmont Empress is a new Customs House condo building. That's a white building. And that marks the entrance to the commercial part of Government Street and downtown. I started this vlog by saying that the best view was from the third floor. And as you can see here, the third floor will be closed as of January 2nd, 2022. Very surprising because the third floor contains the best parts of the museum, Becoming BC, Old Town, and the First People's Gallery. Those three were the cornerstone of this magnificent museum. In subsequent vlogs, I hope to take you through those three galleries as they were before they were closed. Only recently, the museum was named as the #1 museum in Canada by TripAdvisor. So, what changed? It is the purpose of this introductory vlog to give you some idea how it got to this stage. It would be an understatement to say that in the last year, let's say in the last 12 months, the museum has gone through some tectonic events and changes. And that is why the Latin term Annus Horribilis, meaning terrible year, would be quite appropriate. Very important to this story is the acknowledgement of the museum that they are on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people, First Nations people, the Songhees, and the Ksepsung Nation. So let's have a look at some of the tectonic events in a chronological order. The first controversy dealt with an indigenous artifact of doubtful origin that was declared by the museum to be an indigenous artifact of archaeological significance, dating back many years. According to the museum's archaeological curator, Grant Keddy. Even though an indigenous artist declares, "I have no doubt it's mine," in a later article. On the left, the stone pillar which was found. On the right, a photo of the stone pillar that was apparently carved by the artist in 217 and lost on the beach. You be the judge. About the same time, the museum was faced with this headline, which was rather devastating. Royal BC Museum faces allegations of systemic racism, toxic work environment. Wow, how bad does it get? An internal survey pointed to the museum as being racist, anti-Indigenous, and a colonial space. Wow, dynamite. In the context of 2021, I suppose nobody can survive a toxic work environment. And so we learn of the stepping down of the CEO of the Royal BC Museum, Dr. Jacques Lohman, or Professor Lohman, as he preferred to be addressed. Back in 2012, it was considered to be an incredible coup when the BC Royal Museum appointed Professor Lohman as its new CEO, with deep European museum roots. A museum curator, last of the Museum of London. Doesn't get better than that. Unless the narrative about the European colonialism in North America, specifically British Columbia, changes. A headline from Canadian Press: Royal BC Museum apologized after Pro finds racism culture of fear, includes a tweet from Troy Sebastian, the curator of the Indigenous collection at the Royal BC Museum. I'm happy to leave that wicked place behind. Yet, as long as the museum continues to possess my family's sacred items that were taken from us during residential school, I can never truly leave. That only echoed the sentiments of Lucy Bell, the former head of Indigenous Collections and Repatriation, who also cited racism and a lack of diversity during her parting speech in the summer of 2020. About the same time, another story hit like a hurricane, and that was the story of the residential school graves that were discovered at various residential schools in Western Canada. While some children died of disease, it's alleged that abuse was perpetrated by religious orders such as the Catholic Church, which ran the organizations. A dark and forgotten part of colonial history was that from 1870 to 1996, more than 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were placed in residential schools across the country, often against their parents' will. They were forbidden to speak their own language or to practice their culture. That dark part of colonial history was certainly not reflected in the first People's Gallery of the museum. And that led to prolonged demonstrations at the BC legislature as thousands gathered to honor Indigenous children who passed away in residential schools. That was marked by orange T-shirts and teddy bears on the steps of the BC legislature, creating a crescendo of awareness in the population of the problems associated with First Nations. That could not have been lost on the museum. Just to emphasize the new narrative about colonialism, the statue of Captain Cook, which had stood in front of the Empress Hotel for so long, was torn down with indignation by protesters who threw the statue into the inner harbor.
Haven't we been down this dark road before? Don't we remember just where?
And yes, on top of the dome of the BC legislature is the statue of Captain Vancouver. And I think the only thing that saved him from being torn down was that, well, he's at the top of the legislature. So he's safe for now. In view of all this fervent anti-colonial activity, we hear with surprise the following announcement from the museum. 2021, it fell upon acting CEO Daniel Muzyka to start the process of decolonizing the galleries on the third floor by well, you guessed it, closing them down. That, of course, caught many people by surprise and consternation and maybe even shock. How could these prize-winning galleries that caused the museum to be rated number one all of a sudden be so toxic as to require them closing down? Well, they presented the wrong colonial narrative. The narrative had changed. There was no way to fit the existing galleries to the present narrative. It is said that the new narrative would include underrepresented voices and reflect the lived experiences and contemporary stories of the people in British Columbia. BC Tourism Minister Melanie Mark stated that our government's commitment to truth and reconciliation demands that we diversify and decolonize the way we share the history of British Columbia. For too long, museums have been colonial institutions that exclude others from telling their own stories. An opinion piece by Lucas Ackroyd states that the Royal BC Museum has no real plan and needs to pause exhibit closures. World-class museums rarely disassemble their galleries without releasing a plan, budget, or timeline for what is to replace them. However, that's exactly what the Royal BC Museum in Victoria is doing. Well, that criticism proved to be unfounded, as you will see soon. In February of 2022, Alicia Dubois was named as the new CEO of the Royal BC Museum. With her multidisciplinary background coupled with her passion for fostering inclusive perspectives, it was felt that Alicia was the right person to lead the museum going forward. What is conspicuously absent from her rich resume is the word European. She has no European museum experience. Hey, that's a plus. In her seasoned resume put out by the museum, there comes out a strong business background, and I count 7 references to Indigenous organizations. During all this turmoil, we learn of the passing of Jean-Jacques André, who was the architect of Old Town, natural history, and the first people's exhibit at the Royal BC Museum. And that was in January of 2022. What an amazing coincidence. 2 of Mr. Jean-Jacques André's efforts, Old Town and First People's exhibit, were closing down, but natural history, the second floor, still exists. That is until this blockbuster, and I can only describe it as a blockbuster, news arrived this past Friday. In a jaw-dropping announcement made by BC Premier John Horgan, historic investment to build modern new Royal BC Museum, safeguard the collection. Building a new state-of-the-art Royal BC Museum. Very importantly, seismically safe, and that was another reason given for the need for a new museum. You heard it, a new museum. Cost $789 million. The museum, as we knew it, will cease to exist as of September 2022, to reopen in 2030. By the way, that price tag of $750 million would make it the biggest museum project in Canada ever. At the back of the museum, you will find the cornerstone laid March 19, 1966 by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. That's the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth I. That cornerstone should surely be part of the new museum to open in 2030. And just almost the very next day, the newly elected leader of the Liberal Provincial Party, Kevin Falcon, pledges to scrap the new Royal BC Museum project, saying that there's many more important items to spend this money on. So the next provincial election is in 2024. Promises to scrap it. Well, that's politics, a very tough game. The opposition is also bending about a figure of $100 million to upgrade the present facilities, leaving a lot of money on the table for other important priorities. More devastating were the comments of Adam Olson, a member of the Green Party and also a member of the Sartlet First Nation. who says that the colonial legacy cannot be fixed with a bright, shiny, new museum. Well, the government is certainly committed to try and prove him wrong. But with the next provincial election being in 2024, it could all fall by the wayside. We'll see. And as a final thought in view of everything that's transpired, you have to wonder, when are they going to remove the word British from British Columbia? That may happen. And finally, to the very few of you who viewed this video to the very end, thank you for viewing, and I shall see you next Friday as I walk through the first of the 3 galleries which were closed down, and that would be Becoming BC. See you next Friday.